Hello, colleagues, and welcome to today's webinar. It's one of our Ask SENSS webinars, but focusing on supervisors and supporting applicants. I am Franciscos Filipeos. I am the director for the South and East Network for Social Sciences, and I'm joined today by Professor Mark Johnson, is our deputy director and the dean at Goldsmiths University, one of our 8 partners. We will be doing a double act today. Let me just start by saying a big thank you to every single one of you who is here today. We truly appreciate your efforts in supporting applicants. And also, let me reassure you that we try to do a lot of demand management. I know that some of you might have been inundated by emails from candidates asking you to become their supervisors. I can reassure you that, first of all, in our guidance, we have very clear etiquettes and protocols for students when they contact supervisors. But whenever I deliver a webinar focusing on applicants and applications, and I've delivered 4 of them so far, and I have one more coming up just before Christmas. I do say to candidates, this is how you should be contacting supervisors, and please do not contact them with speculative ideas without actually having a fully fleshed proposal. Obviously, that doesn't stop everyone from contacting you, but at least we try our best to ensure that we send out and the key message, which is make sure that you've got enough as a proposal before you contact supervisor. I've just seen also Jenny Wilders is here with us, who's our training and development manager, an integral part of our core team supporting students. Mark, is there anything you wish to say before I start with the presentation?
No, just hello to everybody, and great to have you here. Thanks for joining us as well, Jenny. And I think let's just get on with it.
Okay. What I will also say is that we are recording the webinar, and the recording will be made available for all supervisors through our virtual learning environment. We will be sending out an email with instructions where that will be. If you haven't come across VLE, I doubt anybody here doesn't, but if you haven't come across VLE, please register on the virtual learning environment. The link is on the website. We've got a wealth of information, a wealth of material, not only for students, but also for supervisors that we would like you to access. So just a few words about, and just in case the message has gone out to the wrong people, I just want to highlight this is a session for supervisors only. I had it in the past where occasionally students got access to this link by the distribution lists. If you are an applicant, this is not the right place to be. Please leave. We're going to be discussing things with supervisors. We've got one more session, as I said, coming up on the 3rd of December, focusing specifically on applicants. So we're going to say a few words about what is SENSS, the expectations for PhD students. Mark will take over from me there, and then we'll come back to identifying the right applicant, the supervisor's role, and I'll say a few words also about the assessment criteria, trying to demystify the assessment criteria. I expect the first few slides to go quite quickly. Most of you know SENSS. I'll just bring everyone up. We are funded by the ESRC, one of the 7 councils under the umbrella of UKRI. There are 14 plus us 15 doctoral training partnerships, which cover the vast majority of the UK. I think at the moment we are just under 100, just under 80 institutions, higher education institutions participating in those 15 doctoral training partnerships. And what we do is we award studentships, which is our bread and butter, but also we award postdoctoral fellowships. Disclaimer here, the competition for this year postdoctoral fellowship is yet to open. We have been asked by the ESRC to put a pause on that. We hope to have the competition up and running either just before Christmas or shortly after Christmas. Keep an eye out because it's a very attractive and very lucrative competition for postdoctoral fellows. We have the ability to award up to 4 postdoctoral fellows every single year, and we for the next at least 2 years. So overall, there are just roughly 500 ESRC funded studentships. Usually with the top up that some of the partners do, we go up to 600. So this is the kind of overall cohort. And SENSS is a partnership between East Anglia, Essex, which is a coordinating institution, Goldsmith City, Lincoln, Cranfield, Middlesex, and Roehampton. And over 80 ESRC funded students have been awarded in the last 2 years. It's actually, I've checked the data again this morning. We have 83 active and 1 student who is going to start in February. We had an international student with visa. So that's going to go up to 84 in the new year. And we aim for another 40 to 45 studentships this year. So gradually the cohort will increase. We offer, as I said, a very interdisciplinary research environment. We do subject-specific, generic. There is advanced training. All the information is on the VLE. We also have access to SAGE Campus. Access to SAGE Campus, again, through the VLE, is not only for students, it's also for supervisors, and it's also for non-funded students. So if you have other doctoral researchers working with you, ask them to register through the VLE, and access SAGE Campus is a resource that SENSS is paying for the wider community of doctoral researchers across the DTP. And then, of course, we've got a very wide network of external organizations that provide us with work placement opportunities. There are additional opportunities and budgets for overseas visits, field work. Students get, the RTSG, the Research Training Support Grant, academic publishing through our Sentio, the journal, and all this is, as I said, included in the VLE. I'm really pleased that we now have a full house in terms of the team. So I've been the director since December 2023. I'm coming up to my second anniversary. Mark has been with us for the last year and a half. Felicity has actually, we were discussing it yesterday, has been longer with the DTP than I am. I'm with the DTP since 2016 when I was the academic lead at Kent. Jen is also a relatively new addition to the team, just under 2 years as well. And then we've got our coordinator, Rachel, and Aaron, our administrator. Aaron is the person behind the website, and in every single opportunity I get to say that, I'll say it, he's doing a brilliant job on the website. And we've got Sarah, who's a finance business partner, who is looking after the financial aspects. And generally, when it comes to the competitions, the 2 people that are predominantly working on the competitions is Rachel and Aaron, and I've got their emails at the end of the presentation. As most of you know, if you don't know, and I hope this is not a surprise, SENSS is structured around thematic panels. We've got 6. Just a bit of background. The way these have been developed is when the ESRC came out with a call, we wanted to move into something which was very interdisciplinary. The previous iteration of SENSS, the DTP1, was focused on 13 very siloed, specific social sciences discipline pathways. So what we did was an exercise where we mapped the ESRC priorities, the sustainable development goals, and the strengths of the 8 partners, the research strengths of the 8 partners. And through an iterative process, we came up with these thematic panels, which are not in an order of importance as you have them here. They're equally important for us. There are no quotas for studentships for each one of them. Obviously, some of those thematic panels, like justice institutions and social change, or the health well-being, are slightly bigger because there are more participating institutions. So when we ask students and supervisors to select a thematic panel, we always ask them to go onto the website, look. Now we have actually micro website for each one of them, to look at the thematic panel guidance, what kind of topics, what kind of priorities do they address, and that's the best way of selecting which is the thematic panel you should be guiding your student to submit their application. With the exception of 4, most institutions participate in the vast majority of thematic panels. The 4 exceptions are Cranfield, which does not participate at all in the health, well-being, and social care, and in the advanced methods. Lincoln, which is not participating in the advanced methods, and Middlesex, which does not participate in the digital social sciences. With those four exceptions, almost every other institution through one unit of analysis, unit of assessment, yes, ref unit of assessment or another, participate in those thematic panels. Right. What are the opportunities and expectations? So the next few slides that Mark will present is more about the additional tools you could have to think about shaping the studentship and training and developing the student. One of the integral parts of our application process is, the training plan, the development plan for the student, and the assessment on that. So Mark will say a few words about those opportunities and expectations, and then I'll come back to candidates, the application process, and the competition.
Thanks, Franciscus. So hello again, everybody. Great to have you here. The first thing just to say is that in terms of studentships, there are a variety of lengths of studentships, and there's a number of factors involved with thinking about the length of the studentship for any particular applicant. The standard award is 3.5 years, 42 months if you're a full-time student, or 84 months if they are coming in on a part-time basis. And that includes the 3-year standard period of PhD registration, an additional 3 months for general training that they may need as part of their PhD studies, and an additional 3 months for a placement. I'll say more about the placement in a minute, but it's just important to kind of think that that is the kind of the standard offering, but there's a lot of variation. For those who come in, and particularly those who've come in and they've not completed a master's level training before proceeding to the MPhil PhD, they can also apply for a 4.5 year award, 54 months full-time or 108 months part-time. And this is particularly for folk who've not undertaken any master's training at all. There are then a variety of other award lengths alongside of that, and a lot is contingent on A, have they started their PhD already, and B, then what are the different sorts of training requirements that people might have. So let's imagine that we have somebody who's come in, they've done a master's degree program, they have much of the kind of the basic training that you would expect, but there are areas of training that are specified in the application that would be needed, and that they could make a case for needing additional time on top of the 3 months that is automatically allocated for training. That's the critical thing. So there's that 3 months automatic allocation, but there's potential for requesting additional time depending on what those training needs are. So it's something to bear in mind as you're working with your applicants. Maybe just to say quickly a note in terms of people who have started their PhD. So if somebody is commenced their PhD, the key thing is they could be awarded if they have not completed more than half of the normal period of registration of the PhD at the time they would take up the award. A really easy rule of thumb is, if they've done 1 year full-time PhD, or let's say that they're starting now that PhD, they could apply this year to come in to SENSS next year for a studentship, but the award then would be reduced by the amount of time that they had already spent on the PhD. But there are limits to that. So if somebody's undertaken, more than half of what would be the standard award, then they would not be eligible for applying for a SENSS studentship. If you have any questions about that, we'd encourage you to get in touch with your operational lead at your institution or your academic lead, just to check things with them, and then of course be in touch with folk in the core team if there's any further queries around that you might have. I'll say more about the placement in a minute, but just to note that this award includes the placement as well as the additional 3 months for training. One thing we've put in bold here, and it's really, really important when you're already beginning to work with applicants and think about their PhD, a condition of the new ESRC funding through SENSS is that a student must submit their thesis within the funded period of the studentship. Really important for people to think about planning for that when they're already beginning to make their application. many of you will be in institutions where, and been a situation where the convention is you have the normal period of registration for the PhD, and then what is variously called across the sector a writing up year or a completion period or things like that. The ESRC does not recognize that. What they said is that students must complete within the funding period. Now, the rationale for that is, and there's a legitimate reason here, is that we shouldn't expect students to have to work beyond the period of funding in order to complete their PhD. But it's just really important to bear that in mind, really from the outset. There is provision for additional extensions to be made if they're successful post-award in applying for an overseas institutional visit. Say a bit more about that, as well as other provisions for parental and sick leave and other special circumstances. And we have separate seminars coming up that deals with all of that, not necessarily for you to worry about that at the point of application. The one thing that I would note, and I'll keep coming back to it, is that part of the award includes if people need to undertake overseas fieldwork. In fact, let's go to the next slide, Francisco, because I think we cover some of these things in that next slide. So what does a STENS studentship include? Well, it's a paid stipend. And for full-time students, the expectation is that they're going to be doing a full working week on their PhD for 48 weeks a year. As I've indicated, they have a paid research and practice placement of 3 months for full-time. They have annual leave entitlements each year, which are paid sickness absence, paid parental leave. Now, the next bit is important in relationship to thinking about applicants. You can apply, so applicants could apply for additional funding for a language training extension. So if you indicate in your application that you need to undertake specialist training, and the ESRC sets out very clearly the different sorts of entitlements depending on the difficulty and challenges in obtaining training for specific languages, you can be granted additional time for that language learning as part of your thing. Really important for you as supervisors to bear in mind is make sure that is written into the application. That is the point in which it needs to be applied for, not subsequent to award. The second thing is if folk are planning to do particularly overseas field work, the cost of doing overseas field work, you don't get additional time for doing overseas field work, but any additional cost associated with field work outside of the UK needs to be specified in the application. Now, in terms of UK field work, you can also apply for additional costs to support UK fieldwork, but that comes post-award through the research training and support grant that individuals have. But really the key things to bear in mind for any students to whom this applies, the language training and the overseas fieldwork, to make sure that that is specified within the application. As Francisco's noted, there are research training support costs, our research training and support grant. This is post-award people put in to attend conferences, could be for fieldwork in the UK. There's also then a competitive process to apply for overseas institutional visits. An overseas institutional visit, we're very keen to support for people to kind of expand their networks internationally, but to spend a period of time normally in another higher education institution in a country outside of the UK. And if you were successful in that, your award period can also be extended for that time. And then there's opportunities for students to apply for, and indeed supervisors to apply for funding for student-led cohort building and training events. If you have any questions or queries about that, do get in touch with your academic leads, your operational leads. And again, to encourage you, please do sign up for the SENSS VLE. There are so many fantastic opportunities that are available there. Let me just say something quickly about research and practice placements. And this does relate when you're thinking about supporting folk to do applications. So all of our SENSS funded doctoral researchers are expected to complete a placement of 3 months, if they're full-time, or 6 months part-time. And that time is already factored into their studentship. For everyone awarded a studentship, that time is automatically factored into that. Research and practice placements involve work with an organization for an agreed period on a defined project or research area. It can be allied to, adjacent to the kind of the thesis that people are proposing to undertake. But it is not simply meant to be extending that thesis work with that same group of supervisors in that placement. It needs to have a distinctive element, and it needs to be related to their development and training needs. What are the sorts of things that a research and placement will enable them to acquire? The sorts of additional skills that they may not otherwise acquire through the kind of process of doing PhD training and thesis work. Importantly, if doctoral researchers do not then subsequently undertake a placement, and our steer is very strong about this in expectations, it would only be in exceptional circumstances and through application that we would permit somebody not to do it, then the 3 months allocated for the placement would be reduced from their studentship award. And of course, there would be the corresponding thing is that their expected date of submission would also be reduced accordingly. Next slide, please. Just a quick note on employment. For full-time students in particular, the expectation is that this is a full-time position that they're taking on, and taking on other full-time employment is not permitted. Students are allowed to take on a certain amount of paid teaching or other research work, but the key thing is that they are expected to respect the 37.5 working hours a week rule in terms of time devoted to the PhD. We put this here because you may get questions from applicants about the sort of, whether they can work or not alongside of this. Part-time students cannot hold a full-time job. They could hold a part-time job so long as that part-time job and part-time studies do not add up to more than the 37 working hours a week rule. So together, the two different components. And again, it's just respecting the studentship as, equivalent to a part-time position that they would take up. And we don't want people to be overcommitting themselves with this. Students can suspend their studentships for up to 12 months to take on a full-time paid job. If it relates closely to their PhD. We would not normally expect somebody to say, midway through the PhD, I'm taking time out so that I can, take on a paid job with the intention of at some point of returning to this. And it would only be if it was really directly relevant to their PhD that we would allow that. Stipends are tax-free for students. Any other paid work that they may undertake, of course, are taxable as normal. Next slide, please. Can studentships be extended? Yes, they can. As I've already talked about, the undertaking difficult language training. Again, just a note, this has to be pre-approved by SENSS. It needs to be written in as part of the application process. And if they are undertaking an overseas institutional visit. This is post-award through a competitive process, and we make calls for overseas institutional visits every year. There's one coming up that will be launched in early in the, not the new academic year, but the new calendar year in January. There'll be a call for the overseas institutional visits for our existing students. We've already indicated, of course, there is provision for parental leave or sickness absence and other sorts of absences, and this has all been now revised in line with the new UKR guidelines on this. For existing supervisors, if you're an existing supervisor, do make sure that you're coming along to our separate webinar, which covers all the new rules by the UKRI, and which we think have been very beneficial for our students. Just a quick note then, once students have started, they must seek permission to transfer if they want to move from part to full-time study or vice versa, to suspend, interrupt, or intermit their studies. And here's another important point. We understand that, of course, it's just in the natural course of a PhD, what students propose at this stage, there might be changes and modifications that will necessarily be made to the plan of research that they undertake. If there are substantial changes, if they are completely changing what they had set out to do initially and put in their application and what they were funded to do, then that has to go through a process of approval and sign off from SENSS. And this is just part of our responsibility in terms of the ESRC and publicly funded money. Vagiscos, I think I'm back to you. One thing I just wanted to say for colleagues, and particularly those of you new to this, just as a reminder to you all that so the funding for this comes via the UKRI through the Economic and Social Research Council, as Francisco said, but it's also just important to remember that your respective institutions are also contributing match funding to this. And it's something just to emphasize to applicants that this is in a sense the co-funding model. All of our institutions are committed to this and are putting in significant investment into this in these kind of ways. So just important to kind of remember and recall that. Francisco, back to you.
Thank you, Mark. And just to give you a picture of that, we have 29 studentships awarded by the ESRC. It's only through the 8 partners match funding, which are currently match funding at 25% of the stipend, the fees, and everything like that. The fact that we can go up to 40, 42, plus the partners have made a significant commitment by waiving the fees for international and home candidates. So most institutions charge significantly higher fees for international candidates. When you get an international candidate through SENSS, they don't actually have to top up the fee, because that is usually the case in some funding schemes. So let's go on to identifying and support a potential SENSS applicant here, which is the next set of slides. When I was the academic lead at Kent, I was also the faculty associate dean for graduate studies for social sciences. I was looking at organizing this type of events. So the most straightforward candidates you will get are master students at your home institution. These are type of students that you usually know them well. They might already be working with them. You might already have supervised their dissertation. And if you identify talent through that group of students, irrespective of whether they're completing before the SENSS application deadline or after, try to work with them and see whether you can identify. Equally, as Mark suggested with the funding models, you could attract undergraduate students, and in the previous round of funding, ESRC had a very clear quota that we needed to split our cohorts in 50% of undergraduate, 50% of postgraduate. This does not hold for this funding round of funding, which means that undergraduate students are not coming through in masses, but still we would like to get them. Some of them might have aspirations to work in the research roles. Again, you know them well. You might be working with them on a dissertation, but equally they have received less training than master students. Now, one of the usual questions here is, do we actually expect the same proposals? The answer is no. When the proposals go to the thematic panel, they are clearly identified as a master's proposal and an undergraduate. So the thematic panels know whether some proposals come from undergraduate students, and they can adjust their scores for obviously the difference in the training. And then, of course, you've got applicants that contact you to explore potential supervision. And these are most of the time unknown in terms of abilities. And you need to make an evaluation of the skills, their potential, and the strength of the proposal. Equally, they bring the excitement of the new, as they are new candidates. And in the beginning of the presentation, I refer to these candidates because some of them come through the webinars. I said, you need to have a very clear etiquette and very clear protocol when approaching supervisors. Now, how can we identify the typical successful candidate in this process? First of all, they need to be motivated. It's interpersonal statement, and the personal statement is part of the evaluation process. They need to be able to demonstrate that they have this drive to conduct PhD studies, doctoral research studies. They could come with good research training or the potential to get trained, especially when they come from undergraduate. Excellent proposal in terms of topic and methodology, excellent fit with the supervisory team. So the proposal fits very well with your research interests and expertise. And this is what I always say to students. If you don't identify the right person to supervise you, that proposal won't go anywhere. It's the supervisory team is an integral part of our evaluation process, and the support the supervisory team can give to candidates is an integral part of our evaluation process. And also, we want them to think about the fit with the proposed pathway, the interdisciplinarity, and the impact potential of the proposed research, because again, these are parts of our evaluation process. So what is the supervisor's role in this application process? Remember, when the student submits the proposal, and the deadline is the 14th of January at 12 o'clock noon UK time. I constantly emphasize that to candidates. If you have candidates working from other time zones, remind them it's noon UK time, is not in their home time zone, because I have seen cases that they've missed the application by a couple of hours. Once they submit their application, that application comes to you, and you need to effectively submit also a supervisory statement. The panels that review that supervisory statement, they review it as part of the application, and we don't see the project, the candidate, and the supervisor as three separate things, but we actually see them as one when it comes to the application. So first of all, you can proactively identify potential applicants, work with them on the development of their proposal, offer feedback, provide advice on methodological challenges, discuss potential impact activities. One of the key aspects of our evaluation is the feasibility of the proposal. Given the new rule from the SRC on the 3.5 years, or the funding period, we look at that feasibility really, really closely. And if there are any questions in your mind about that feasibility, work with the candidates to address them, and discuss potential impact activities as well through your experience. So maintain an active communication channel, remind them about crucial deadlines, and also write your supporting statement as part of the application. In order to be eligible, you must meet three conditions. First of all, either the primary or the secondary supervisor must be experienced, so they must have supervised more than 2 students to completion. If that is not the case, then we would expect the home institution to appoint what we would call a supervisory mentor as part of the supervisory team. So you could have 2 early career researchers with 1 very experienced supervisor looking after the supervisory team and the way it's working. We would expect you to have attended some training, and this can be UKCGE, it would be your home university, but we would expect you to tell us. And occasionally, sometimes there is a question in the application, how much detail. If you could remember the approximate date of that training, it would be useful, because it gives us confidence that you've gone through that training. I've seen applications with very speculative supervisor training saying, I've done training in the past and things like that, which, don't give confidence to the panels. And equally, when you succeed, we would expect you to have a commitment to attend the mandatory SENSS supervisor training, where we say a few words about managing that studentship. And Mark and Jenny take a much more leading role into that session. So there are a few things you're asked to do. First of all, check whether they meet the academic and residential eligibility criteria. At the moment, the easiest thing you could work through in terms of the eligibility criteria is that unless the student is a British citizen, has settled or pre-settled status, or indefinite leave to remain at the point of the application, they are international students. The problem here with international students, or the challenge, not necessarily a problem, the challenge is that international students are under a quota from the ESRC, which means that we can't award more than 30% of our cohort. So in practice, this means 12, maximum 13 studentships every year. So it's highly competitive. I keep getting questions from international applicants. Please manage their expectations. It's not going to be an easy process. We start with about 700 applications. We reach 200 applications after the institutional shift. The thematic panels nominate roughly 80, and out of those 80, 40 receive a studentship. So you can understand that it's a very big paneling process and a very big filtering process to identify the best talent. Try to give them some guidance on drafting the research proposal if they come to you with a relatively well-developed one. Also talk to them about data skills and advanced quantitative methods. There is quite clear guidance on the website what these two are. They are ring-fence studentships for those. Talk to them about the appropriate length, the structure, and the training they have to do. Think with them around the potential training they need to undertake for this project specifically. And if they haven't identified the placement, what I always ask them to do is think about the characteristics of the organization that could act as host organization. Ethical considerations, and all the things that Mark just mentioned about overseas, fieldwork, language training, it's at the point of the application. If they fail to put that in the application at that point, we will award them the studentship, but we won't award them the extra funding to do that. And as I said, your main role here is also to recommend to us the appropriate length of studies. So through the development needs analysis you do with the student, think about, how much time this PhD really needs. Is it a 3.5 year? Is it a 3.75, a 4, so on and so forth. So if they meet the eligibility criteria, they apply to your home institution. Sometimes institutions set these deadlines individually, so please check with your academic lead and your operational lead. I know that some institutions might have as early as mid-December deadlines for the SENSS, and then keep reminding them of the 14th of January, 12 o'clock, so they don't miss that deadline. We won't be interviewing candidates, but you might interview them as part of the SENSS, as part of the admission process into the institution. One small detail, which is actually quite crucial here, in between the application submission to SENSS and the institutional nomination, which is, I think, almost a month later from the 14th of January, the home institution is allowed to open the application again for any potential improvements. So imagine the student has gone through interview, someone has also reviewed their proposal in your home institution, they make very useful suggestion, comments. The student can incorporate those suggestions as part of that institutional shifting, which means that their application obviously cannot be substantially different from the original one, but can be significantly improved from the original one submitted to SENSS when it comes to our thematic panels. So the first stage is that institutional review where they reviewed internally, and then each institution submits one application per unit of assessment. Important thing for you, again, if you have any candidates that meet equality, diversity, and inclusivity criteria, students with caring responsibilities, students with disabilities, students coming from particular ethnic backgrounds, especially if they are a BAME candidate, these studentships get additional nominations. So, even if they're not possibly within the one nomination the department might decide to do, if you could demonstrate that they meet these criteria, then they can be nominated as an additional candidate. There is no quota on international candidates, but we're now implementing a rule where the unit of assessment cannot nominate more than one. So it's a complex system. You don't need to worry about this, but what we're trying to do is trying to reduce the number of international applications that move through the process of the competition, because it's becoming really, really unmanageable to have so many international candidates for so small number of studentships. And then the applications are considered by the thematic area panels, which are independent, and then they nominate applicants to the SENSS Management Board, and the SENSS Management Board makes the final award decisions. At every stage of the process, at the institutional shifting, institutions provide feedback. At the thematic stage, if the candidate is not progressed, SENSS provides feedback. At the management board, if they reach the final board, but they are not at the top of that list and therefore they won't get the studentship, again, SENSS provides feedback. So at every single stage, if a candidate becomes unsuccessful, we give them feedback on their application. And then, of course, the supervisors need to provide their statement. As I said, the second supervisor, this is a question we usually get asked, can be based either at the same university or at any of the other SENSS member institutions. If you want to have a second supervisor which is outside SENSS, they can be a supervisor, but they need to be a third supervisor. So we always require students to have at least 2 supervisors from SENSS institutions. And as I said, mention in your statement the training you have attended in the past 3 years. So, crucial in the proposal is the supervisor statement, where you comment on the quality and feasibility of your applicant's research proposal. You need to demonstrate the broader significance for the theme, the discipline, the positioning. Give us some confidence about the research plan and the timeline, the potential impact. And as I said, if the studentship is one on advanced quantitative methods and or data skills, then please highlight that also in your supervisory statement and explain why you consider it to be a data skills. Data skills is usually applications that utilize large data sets. Advanced quantitative methods is a relatively slightly more loose defined, because what might be advanced quantitative methods for one discipline might not be for another. So you just need to convince the panel. The process there is you make the recommendation, the thematic panels build on that recommendation, and they make recommendation to the management board. And if we accept that recommendation, then you could get one of the steer studentships. The second part of the applicants of the supervisory statement focuses on the applicant or not the project. And here, it's not simply education. It could be work experience, but it could be also lived experiences of the candidates. So it's really important that you ask the candidates to give you that information, because that information might be quite important for the process. So their motivation behind pursuing a particular topic might be relevant to their lived experiences, and that's something that you could further highlight. But also what we ask you to tell us is what is the training the applicant will need, and we will ask you to select the studentship structure that is the most appropriate. In my advice here is always be risk averse. If you're thinking it's a 3.5 but marginally 3.75, put it at the 3.75, and we can then decide at a later stage. What happens is thematic panels review those applications, make recommendations. Mark and I independently review those applications, make recommendations, and then we come to a common agreement where we say, okay, this is the most appropriate time. So if you feel you need to provide additional time or give additional time to that candidate, it doesn't matter actually in terms of the studentship evaluation, whether it's a 3.75 or a 4, but it does matter when the funding gets awarded, because then the student will have appropriate time for the project. And also, talk to us about yourselves as supervisors and supervisory teams. So here, the main pitfall I tend to see in supervisory statements is they're all focused on the primary supervisor, and then they forget it's actually a team that is supporting the student. And especially in the context of interdisciplinarity, and just to give you a sense, I just came out of the collaborative projects competition evaluation panel, and one of the discussions we were having was, particular projects, what are the disciplines of the 2 supervisors? Can we ensure that there is interdisciplinarity? Are there any gaps that we need to fill in terms of other additional disciplines? So talk about the collective research agenda, publications, intellectual contributions, work with external partners you might have done, which have led to impact, a wider work and support from the broader institutional environment, existing or past supervision in the same disciplinary area and the same topics. And again, how can you work with the candidate to support them in their training needs and identify them? So for example, someone might have very strong relationships with an international established institution in another country. And what you could say in that supporting statement is, actually, we will be working with the student to secure an overseas institutional visit to that. So that actually is something that it's addition, a very good addition to the application. Right. I'll say a few words on the assessment criteria, and then we'll see whether there are any questions. Although I can see Jenny frantically typing answers to the questions on the question and answer box. 5 categories. The most important one, obviously, is the quality and feasibility of the proposal, the 40% of the weights. A major change from last year is the split between interdisciplinarity and impact. In the last round, interdisciplinarity and impact were on a single criterion, 10%. Now they're 2 separate criteria, and there are 10% each. On the website, we have 2 documents which very clearly articulate how interdisciplinarity is evaluated, how impact is evaluated, and what is a good impact in an application and what is a poor impact in an application, what is truly interdisciplinary and what is not truly interdisciplinary. The fourth point is the evidence that the candidate needs to present to us about their whether they are well prepared for the proposed research. And then the final criterion is around the quality of the local research environment and the supervisory expertise. So 20% and 20% see substantial amounts of the application. When we look at the quality and feasibility of the proposal, and to a certain degree around interdisciplinarity and impact, the panels tend to look at the proposed research project, the project itself, and the wider significance. But it's also complemented by your supervisory statement. So if you tell us that, look, this is a big area of development in this particular thematic panel, remember the SENSS assessors might not be direct experts in the proposal, on the proposal. So this is something really, really important to remember. And it's something that I try to convey to the students. The thematic panels are interdisciplinary panels. Therefore, you could have very different perspectives coming to review your proposal. And I think the challenge there is that you need to communicate sometimes to non-direct experts to the area. So they will be looking for evidence of the applicant's ability to design and conduct a research project, the coherent and well thought through research plan, any risks from that research plan, and any contingencies for those risks. And also whether they have a strong awareness of their place in the research, in the current field. In a sense, in simple words, have they done their literature review for the project? Then we look at the applicant's description of the previous experience, but also your evaluation of their performance in prior education, of the relevant professional experience, and a description of how the program will contribute to the long-term career aims. The closer the candidate is to their last degree, the more emphasis I would put on, their academic educational experience. The further away the applicant is, and we get quite a lot of mature applicants coming through, the more emphasis I would put on their professional experience. And perhaps there is a gap for them to refresh their skills. So when it comes to the training plan, you could say, okay, actually they've done social sciences, econometric methods 15 years ago. Obviously it has moved, that area has moved a lot. We need to have 3 months additional time because they need to work on Python, R, machine learning, things like that. So these are things you could put forward in the supervisory statement and of course in the training needs of the student. So in essence, if an applicant doesn't have the right training at this particular point, it matters most whether you can identify the right training than actually having the right training. So it's more about the developmental process. And then, of course, finally, the evidence of the quality of the local environment, the supervisory expertise. Again, the thematic panels don't know every single supervisor. Occasionally, you might be a colleague, but most of the time, we don't even know people from the same institutions. So talk to them about your research areas, your knowledge, your expertise. Talk to them about the individual roles, how each of the people on the supervisory team will complement each other and will support the students. Someone might have a better methodological understanding, someone might have a better conceptual understanding. And then, of course, how the proposed research is situated and drawn wider research environment. For example, you might be a member of a center, and that center has other doctoral students. It's a mini culture. Obviously, we expect the student to become part of the SENSS cohort, but when they're working on a daily basis on their PhD, other PhD students working on similar areas, similar subjects, that is really, really important for the research culture of the local environment. Make sure applicants attend well to each section of the form, especially on training completed. We see sometimes forms which are very, very scarce in terms of training, which obviously does not give us confidence that the candidate has done training or the candidate has spent time on the form. If the fieldwork is outside of the UK, remember, it has to be described, posted in the application. It's really, really important. You can't retrospectively apply for that. And again, if a specialist training is required, identified within the application. And we will give them additional studentship type. It has to do with the SRC regulation, how much time they will receive, but you could get up to 6 to 9 months for additional difficult language training. So the team, myself, I always say to candidates, if I can give them some advice, some feedback, more than happy to talk to them. Felicity, as a manager, looks at complex cases and provides us with advice. The most important inbox you should use is the admin. This is the inbox that we keep monitoring, no matter whether people are on leave or anything like that. And it's the inbox that we all have access to, and we can then delegate the relevant email to the most appropriate person. So if it's a training placement question, it might go to Jenny or Mark. If it's a theme type of question, which theme, which of the two, it usually comes to me, and that's my advice. And then, of course, you've got Mark's and Jenny's there, especially when it comes to the DNA. If there are any particular questions about the DNA of the application or the training, you could address them to Mark and Jenny. Right, I'll stop sharing actually here because it might be easier. And then we could have questions. And I can see there's already a hand, yeah. Bernadette.
Do we have it set so folk can actually?
Yes, let me just allow to unmute.
I've got it.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Please forgive me if I have misunderstood the entire context of SENSS. I teach an interdisciplinary program called Art and Politics, and many of my students come from non-social science backgrounds. And some of them opt to do an PhD in art and politics, which encompasses a practice-based part of research, which is, not discursive and may take the shape of multimedia interventions, et cetera, et cetera. Is this the kind of thing that would be looked at by SENSS, because obviously it's ESRC funded, so can the interdisciplinarity that you're talking about encompass these kind of applications?
So I'll take the leap of faith and answer the question. The answer is yes.
Oh, wonderful.
The main thing you need to keep an eye on, which is very evident and very clear in the guidance we give on the website, is that whatever project comes to us should be at least 50% in social sciences. So it could span across. So you mentioned art and politics. If the students can demonstrate that the questions they're asking are social science questions, so they're about human behavior, then it is fundable by the ESRC. One of the things we do on an annual basis is the ESRC is randomly selecting from our pool of students, and they ask us to do what we call assurance checks. So they can always look into these projects and see, you know, are they compliant? Usually Mark and I are competent enough to put a case together, but it's really, really important to demonstrate that the project is embedded in social sciences and it is actually asking social sciences questions. And it could use methodologies from anywhere. That's the other thing.
Yes, okay. Because I have had a lot of interest from people coming from art backgrounds interested in the justice institutions and social change thematic. And while some of their methods may be, for instance, writing graphic novels, they would also have questions around, you know, say misogyny or feminist agency, which would be recognizable within a kind of social science context. Okay, thank you so much for that. Sorry, one follow-up question is that do students like these, who may well be professional artists in their own right, still need to have a work placement? It's an aspect of this that they would perhaps feel uncomfortable with. That's obligatory, is it, for every student applying?
I can pick that up, Francisco. So as we said at the outset, there's an expectation that all of our funded PhD students will undertake a placement. And it's probably important to have a conversation with them, early on about what the nature of that placement might be. I think the key thing is for them to be thinking about ways in which it would expand and help them acquire new skills in operating in new ways that they may not be familiar with, that would, and this will be, of course, contingent on who's coming into it. I think the other thing I would just, to come back to your earlier point, Bernadette, is in terms of thinking about the sorts of, the ESRC expects that that we are funding research that includes this, 50% kind of social science component. We can think about that broadly, of course. Are they asking social science questions? The other thing that there's some expectation is that people will have acquired a range of skills in terms of, be familiar with a range of social science concepts and methodologies. Now, maybe as part of the training things that they identify, if they're coming in from a primarily arts background, for example, it's an opportunity to say, okay, here are the things, here are the sorts of training skills that they might want to acquire as part of their PhD process, and think about identifying those, as well as clearly making the most of the skills and experience that they do bring from their own fields and backgrounds.
Okay, thank you so much. That's really helpful. Thank you.
And one crucial point there, if they're coming without a social sciences background, it's crucial in the training section, in the development needs analysis section of the application, to identify what kind of social sciences training they might require to undertake this project. So although ESRC has moved away from, everybody needs to have a very generic social sciences training, and they focus more on the individual journey, it will be very difficult for me to justify, giving to someone a 3.5, so the minimum, if they come from an arts background that has done no social sciences training and they're asking social sciences questions. So it's really important to mirror and reflect that prior training in the relevant section of the application, and suggest perhaps that we need to do one or two modules in social sciences research methods, or in advanced qualitative or things like that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Brigitte, there's some questions in the Q&A that we might just answer live together. So Helen's asked about talking about roles within the supervisory team. I am ATS. I'm not sure what that stands for, but have 2 decades plus
teaching,
of supporting.
I think. Teaching and scholarship. Teaching and scholarship.
But have 2 decades plus of supporting non-traditional students, particularly from Africa and South Asia, particularly first-generation students and women with caring responsibilities. Wonderful that you bring that background and experience. It's difficult to show this via supervisory training. I mean, Helen, first of all, just encourage you to have those conversations. And I mean, I think, just to go back to one of the things that Francisco said earlier, think about these as supervisory teams. Their expectations around their being within that team, folk who've had that experience of doing supervision to completion, but then really making sure that you make the most of the different contributions across that. And if you if there are things that you bring to that enrich that, don't hesitate to put that in the thing and speak to those strengths. It's the same way that we're encouraging our students to do that. I don't know, Fraser, is there anything else you wanted to add there?
Perhaps some anonymized evidence. If you substantiate this claim, saying these are the kind of type of students, the type of projects as well, because a lot of the time what I do tend to see is a complementarity between the nature of the student and the nature of the project. And just to moan a bit about the SRC, we try to encourage students and projects from the global south, and the global south projects require students from the global majorities to work on them. Yet, on the other hand, we have to work with a 30% quota on an international student recruitment, which is a very kind of a challenging situation. So sometimes, the type of projects and the type of students in an anonymous way might act as evidence in that supporting statement. We've got the next question, which is and apologies, we're reading the questions aloud for the purpose of the recording. As an early career researcher, I sometimes feel that it isn't students competing against other students, but supervisors who help writing the applications competing with each other. As an early career researcher, I can feel like I'm up against supervisors who are professors who are way more experienced, acquired grants, etc. Now, this is one of the interesting things with SENSS, that it's not a typical type of grant that you need to write. It's more about developing individuals and developing doctoral researchers. So my view is that as an early career researcher, you're actually closer to being able to identify the needs of those students. And I think that's the key emphasis. Obviously, in our guidance and in our regulations, we very clearly say that it's the student's responsibility to write the proposal, not the supervisor. And if we find a case where the supervisor has had substantial input into the proposal, or it is actually supervisor proposal, we have the right to actually exclude that proposal from the competition. We have a question which is around quotas. Are themes considered equal at the final stage? There being disparities of the amount of studentships ultimately being awarded between the different themes. Does this just reflect how popular each of the themes are and how many submissions each of them gets in the first place? So in reality, there are no quotas across the themes. We don't start the competition saying, JISC will get 8 studentships, health will get 10. But equally, there are more units of assessment participating in certain themes, which means that they get more nominations. So simply by that, it is highly likely that themes like health, well-being, and social care, or justice institutions and social change will get more studentships. But on the other hand, it makes them far more competitive to get, to the nomination stage. So in reality, there is no mechanism of quota. We, as members of the core team, we basically attend all the thematic panel meetings to ensure that there is a fair and transparent competition and parity. And then the management board receives the detailed reports from those thematic panels. So there is nothing there to suggest that there is a quota. Some themes are bigger, more popular, but as I said, that makes them more competitive as well. Yes. So it's a very interesting, Maria, thank you for that question. Whether I could comment on the interdisciplinarity. So technically, we would expect all proposals to be interdisciplinary in the sense that they apply to the panel and not to the discipline. So they apply to health, well-being, and social care, and they can come from a health perspective, they can come from a business perspective, they can come from any other perspective. What we do have on an annual basis is that we do have to award 3 specifically. So out of all of the proposals that are highly interdisciplinary, we have to select 3 to put forward to the ESRC as interdisciplinary proposals, as exemplars of interdisciplinarity. So while we might get 15 proposals that have been identified as interdisciplinary, the same thing holds here. 3 of them are kind of ring-fenced or allocated the title interdisciplinary proposals, and therefore they get nominated to the SRC for these 3 studentships. But in reality, this is a process where that usually the top proposals are highly interdisciplinary, so they automatically get that brand next to them.
I think that's it.
And there is one more on academic skill support and writing strategy support, which is important for non-traditional students. They tend to be overlooked in favor of recent publications. I think that goes back to Helen's question earlier. So yes, in the supervisor proposal, that's something that we expect you to elaborate. Is, you know, it's why. Imagine you could have an excellent supervisor. This goes back to the discussion around, you know, effective researchers versus effective supervisors. Someone can be a very effective researcher, but they might not be a very effective supervisor because, you know, they can't train the students. And a lot of the emphasis the SRC has put on this round of studentships is actually thinking well beyond the academic world when you allocate a studentship, and hence the placements are integrated. As unfortunate it is, the academic environment is very competitive at the moment, not just in the UK, globally. Fewer and fewer jobs will open. So we need to prepare those students for careers outside the academia. And a lot of those students actually that come from the global majorities might return back to their home country and work for research organizations or conduct other tasks that require these additional skills. So if you as a supervisor can demonstrate that you have done this in the past, you have supported this type of students, for us is a plus, is a very big plus. Right, we're over time. Right, last one, can students upload an external support letter from an external organization? The answer is no. So what we've done as part of our equality, diversity, and inclusivity, what usually was happening is we allowed students to start uploading documents, and we ended up with applications that had 15 document uploads, CVs, letters of support, references, and everything like that. And we had to take a very hard line because I don't think there is an easy way to find the middle ground here. And the hard line was we're stopping asking students to upload anything. They could talk about the partner organization. They don't need to prove to us the support of that partner organization, at least in the application stage. I think panels are experienced enough to pick up if there are any discrepancies there. But students are not allowed to upload anything. So the panels at the SENSS stage, the thematic panels, will only review the material which is within the student's application and the supervisory statement. Perhaps one useful way of doing that is you, in your supervisory statement, you could verify, you know, that you've talked to the student, you know the external partner, you know they have a working relationship. And obviously, if the student has worked, for example, for that external organization before, it's self-evident. We hope you have found this webinar useful. We will be posting it on the VLE. Jenny kindly posted the link to the VLE. If you have any questions about registration, please email the admin inbox. Aaron is there to support you. We will be putting this webinar there for anyone who wants to kind of review the discussion, review the material, review the slides. And thank you very much for all your hard work you're doing. We're actually, I was reflecting earlier today, it's because of you and because of the students that SENSS is a very big success. If you look at our numbers in comparison to other institutions and other DTPs in the UK, we are very well ahead of them. Our website last year had over 100,000 individual visitors. So the message is going out, and it's down to you and the work you're doing with potential applicants and the support you give to potential applicants. I'm really sorry that it's so competitive. I wish I could get as more studentships. The aim is that we will be getting more studentships in the future. But thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you very much for all your efforts.